Part 1, Chapter 2. The Angel with the Whip. Why is a whip such a popular plaything? In the course of my visitation yesterday afternoon, I chanced to invite a birthday party. Neil Maitland is a happy little fellow. There is certainly nothing of the savage about him, yet his mother was telling me that of all his presents, many of them much more valuable, the whip that one of his uncles had given him was quite easily his favorite. He liked to hear the swish of it and the crack of it as he brandished it in the air. He liked to feel the falling lash wind itself smartly about the posts and trees upon which he inflicted his castigations. It has scarcely been out of his hand all day, his mother told me. He seems as proud of his whip as all of his other presents put together. Why is it? The question has puzzled wiser heads than mine. The poet at the breakfast table was not easily baffled, but even he found this problem too difficult for him. This world, he says, is full of mysteries. I could never understand the fascination of a whip. The matter is worth our attention. And how shall we begin? How, indeed, but by asking someone to hold a whip aloft that we may all see clearly the thing that we are talking about. And who's so capable of holding up that whip as Robert Blake? For Robert Blake knows how to hold a whip, not only arm high, but mast high. When Van Tromp with his 73 ships of war appeared off the English coast, the coastguards along the Channel reported that the Dutchman had set a broom at his masthead. He meant to sweep the seas. Blake had not 73 ships at his command, but he was not to be beaten by Van Tromp in the matter of symbolism. He ordered a sign for his own masthead. "I've a whip at the fore," he said, "and a whip is the sign for me, that wherever I go the world may know that I ride and rule the sea." Anyone can see by the way in which Robert Blake holds the whip aloft for us that he perfectly understands the symbolism that he employs. It is to show, he says, that he rules. To him a whip is not an instrument of torture, it is an emblem of authority. The admiral who carries a whip at his masthead claims by that token to be in command of all the seas. And now that we have had a good look at the object of our investigation, we may as well go right back to the beginning of things. Let us visit the cradle of the race. For it so happened, through those sequestered fields in which the first men dwelt, there ran a river, and along the banks of that clear and crystalline stream there flowed a forest of willows. Now one day, as the first man waited beneath the willows whilst his cattle slaked their thirst, he idly tore down one of the supple and yielding branches. From the slender wisp that had a moment before hung trailing over the waters, he quickly plucked the leaves, and lo, in his hand he held a whip. He noticed that, at its swish, the cattle startled, and the birds about him flew away in terror. A strange sense of power thrilled him as he wielded it. He vaguely felt that its possession increased his authority over the beasts of the field. Creatures that had defied him before would be at his mercy now. He felt taller, greater, mightier. He saw that there was an essential distinction between himself on the top hand and the beasts on the other. He understood for the first time what it meant to have dominion over the fish of the sea and the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. He had been born a king. He was made to rule. The whip gave him a strange consciousness of mastery, a subtle sensation of command. It was only a wisp of willow, but it meant so much, and it led to much. It was the forerunner and precursor of all staves, like the staff with which the shepherd king tended his father's sheep, of all rods, like the rod with which Moses smote the rock in the wilderness and divided the sea before the advancing host, of all wands, like the wands of the Egyptian magicians that were put to shame before the face of Pharaoh, of all goads, like the goad with which Shangmar, the son of Anath, slew the Philistines 600 men, and of all scepters, like the golden scepter that the king held out to Esther, and like the scepter of Judah that shall never pass away. The wisp of willow is the father of them all. It is the germ from which they all evolved. The whip was man's first symbol of authority, and as long as the world stands, no boy will ever be able to hold a whip without feeling that it confers upon him dominion and power and glory. A whip makes him monarch of all he surveys. Neil Maitland's fondness for his whip does not augur savagery, it augurs sovereignty. It is part of the magic of his manhood. Agnes McBean dwelt on the farm about 5 miles from Mosegill. There was an understanding between us that I should never go out of my way to visit him. There'll come times, he said, When we shall feel that we like to have you with us, and when those times come, I'll easily yoke up Laddie and run over to the manse. He was as good as his word. Whenever there was sickness or trouble at the Crossways farm, Agnes looked in at the manse. I remember his coming, just after dinner one Saturday. I had heard that his mother, who lived with them, was ailing, so I was not altogether surprised. The old lady's very bad, he said. It's not a good day for you, I know, but if you could manage to run over with me and have a few minutes with her, it would be awful comfort. I remained at the Crossways to tea, and after we had worship in the great farm kitchen, Agnes strolled off to the stable. A few minutes later we heard his whistle, the signal that he was ready, and I went out to him. We drove down to the big white gate, and then Agnes broke into sudden laughter. "Bless my soul," he cried, "I've forgotten my whip. I won't be a minute." And he went running back to the homestead. "But Agnes," I said, when he was once more seated in the spring cart beside me, "I've never seen you use a whip in my life. Was it worth the trouble of going back?" He laughed again. "Oh, I suppose not," he exclaimed. "I've never struck Laddie yet, and I'm not likely to start now. And yet somehow you don't feel the master of your own horse unless you have a whip in your hand. I like to feel the whip is here, even though I never use it. There lies the secret. The whip is the symbol of authority. Man, as Emerson says, is a god in ruins. In the broken pillars, the crumbling arches, and the ivory-covered walls, something of the castle still survives. There are times when a crossing sweeper feels himself a king. Even Bill Sikes likes to think that he can lord it over his own dog. The whip was man's first weapon. On the whole, it has been his best. We are all the better for living in a world that is under the lash. Bunyan describes the Shining One who had a whip in his hand. He chastened the pilgrims sore, Bunyan says, and they did not soon forget it. "Let us get on," said Hopeful to Christian a little later, "lest the angel with the whip overtake us again." Most of us are incorrigibly lazy. We have to be flogged to our tasks. We march to the crack of the whip. The number of people who have blessed the world without being thrashed into doing so is extremely small. We most of us speak contemptuously of the idle rich, the phrase that has become a byword. But what does it mean? It means that the people who are not whipped into working abstain from working, and depend upon it, the rest of us would adopt similar tactics if the castigation of necessity suddenly ceased. When 2,000 years ago Horace made his way to Rome, he tells us that, bereft of property, impaired in purse, sheer penury drove me to scribbling verse. And he thus became a natural leader and federal head of a long line of brilliant writers who have embarked upon the same troubled waters under similarly humiliating conditions. The list would include great names like those of Cervantes, Shakespeare, and Dr. Johnson. When some French gentleman at Madrid suggested to the Archbishop of Toledo that Cervantes, in recognition of the fame that his writings had conferred upon his country, should be supported out of the public purse, a Spanish gentleman exclaimed, "God forbid! It is because he is so poor that he writes so well. It is in his poverty that drives him to his desk." Whilst the author of Don Quixote was thus giving rein to his fancy amidst scenes of pitiable squalor in Castile, our own most splendid dramatist was penning the plays that have made his name immortal. Buchanan Dean declares that if Shakespeare had been the son of a wealthy man with no need of earning his keep, the chances are that the dramas would never have been written. The same was true of Thackeray, and it was certainly true of Johnson. "I was forced to my desk by hunger," says the old doctor bluntly. "I sometimes heartily people speak contemptuously of work that was done for the sake of money. Some of the best work was ever done for the sake of money. What is money for but to induce men to labor?" "Blessed be money," cried Charles Lamb, enthusiastically. "It's a matter of fact beatitude, but it's nevertheless a good one. In every art and craft, in every department of commerce and industry, the need of money has driven men to yield up the priceless fruits of those powers that would otherwise have remained dormant. Indeed, under the pitiless lash of poverty, many a potential idler has pulled himself together and achieved distinction. The same awful volume which contains the revelation of redeeming love declares that if a man will not work, neither shall he eat. It is the crack of the whip. It is no answer to all this to say that in some hands the whip is a dangerous instrument. So in some hands is the staff of the shepherd, the goad of the driver, and even the sceptre of the king. All power is liable to abuse. The abuse of that whip reached its climax on the day that witnessed the redemption of the world. Then Pilate took Jesus and scourged him. The whip, like the scepter, has some ugly blots on its escutcheon, but it is nothing worse than that. History proves, however, that any abuse of the power of the whip brings a strange and swift retribution. When Archbishop Temple was headmaster of Rugby, he was hugely amused and delighted at overhearing one of his boys remark that Temple was a beast, but he was a just beast. There is no need to restrict the scope of the observation to a particular individual. It is true of the race. Man is a beast, but he is a just beast. You have but to expose a wrong, and he will soon see that it is righted. When in our English prisons or in our English ships the lash was used too freely, the facts had but to be published and the evil was suppressed. Or think of the tragedy of slavery. The whip in the white man's hand was the badge of the black man's degradation. The crack of the whip as it resounded across the cotton plantations was not so much the proclamation of the white man's cruelty as the proclamation of the white man's pride. The whip in his hand made him feel like a king, and he yielded to the temptation to which those kings yielded who degenerate into tyrants. But the abuse of the whip was the whip's undoing. It gave the abolitionists an argument by which they were able to awaken the indignation of the country. The white man, with the whip in his hand, lorded it over his ebony brethren. And what happened? Look at this. We are in Jamaica. It is the early gray of the morning of August 1st, 1838, the day on which emancipation came into force. William Knibb is conducting a funeral service, and as the ornately carved and beautifully polished coffin is lowered into the grave, the doxology rises from 10,000 throats. What does it mean? Never before, surely, has the lowering of the coffin been accompanied by the singing of the doxology, but this coffin contains a whip. The slaves are burying the insignia of their bondage. The episode is almost allegorical in its intense significance. The whip was man's first symbol of power, of dominion, of authority, but so surely as that power is abused, a swift nemesis and a crushing humiliation must inevitably overtake it. And that other scourging in Pilate's hall, what of it? Did no strange retribution fasten upon those cruel thongs? He was scourged that all men might regard him as an object of ignominy and contempt. Yet lo, whenever the eyes of men have gazed upon that quivering form and bleeding back, their hearts have been melted and their souls won. The torture that was designed to degrade him has set upon his name a glory that can never vanish or fade.